Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Essential NFL Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Clinton, data scientist slash film junkie, and yeah, I got everything done to do the show before the Thursday night game this week, so that's great. Yeah, able to shift some things around, some changes in my professional life, so able to lock in on the film early, get that knocked out and taken care of, and then actually going to get the opportunity to put quite a bit of focus on the NFL's Big Data Bowl this year, which will be a bunch of fun here. So going to be doing that over the next weeks here. So yeah, I won't, maybe do a special pod or a write up of that and throw that up on here. I won't get too far into it in these game preview pages, but you can look out for that in the weeks to come. It's a pretty cool deal this year. It's looking at player tracking data and movement after the ball has been thrown and between that point and when the ball is caught. Or falls incomplete, whatever ends the passing play. So not looking at the run after the catch, but just, what the receiver is doing with the ball in the air and what the defenders are doing around him. So yeah, should be a really fun project. And in any case, hop into the game previews here. And so we will kick things off. I'm looking at covers.com here and just have the consensus lines up. So have Minnesota, the Los Angeles Chargers here. So yeah, if you checked out the show last week, you'll know that when I was talking about Carson Wentz, mentioned that, I thought it was a really positive performance for him against Cleveland for a number of reasons. And, we'll see what happens against the Eagles. And what happened against the Eagles was, Carson Wentz really reverted to his old forms. One of those things where this stuff can always just be so hard to gauge because you can say, I can say what I saw happen in the most recent weeks, but it doesn't mean I can tell the future on these guys. And sometimes it's a Daniel Jones situation where it's looking more and more like this is just going to be the consistent version of who Daniel Jones is, and sometimes it's a Carson Wentz situation where it doesn't turn out that way at all. Things go haywire once again. So yeah, it was just right back to really questionable decision making and just he kind of played them out of the game early and they made the score look closer late. He's thrown to a lot of talented players, but Carson Wentz is just so erratic at this point, and once I think gotta worry that once things are off the tracks with that it's going to be difficult to get them back on. So definitely I think that there's a much higher likelihood that you're looking to get JJ McCarthy back on the field at this point because Carson Wentz had obviously been doing some good things for the Vikings, but it was the opposite of that. So he'll have a chance to redeem himself tonight. Chargers defense certainly coming off some rough performances here, but at the same time, I do not have high hopes for that Viking side of the ball here. Chargers side is definitely a different deal. So I think that Herbert, he has to clean up the mistakes, right? Because the mistakes have been what have cost them both against the Giants and then in this game against the Colts. Just the interceptions really swung the game in a significant fashion. I think it's much tighter game if maybe the Chargers defense is able to make one or two more plays. Maybe limit one scoring drive, and then Justin Herbert makes one fewer mistake early in the game on either the drives where he's picked off, and you got kind of a different story there. I think just two really competitive teams. So it's been a rough go for the Chargers. We'll see. Joe Alt is questionable for tonight, but once they get him back, it's not going to be the offensive line they were hoping for, of course, but they've just got so many pass catchers that are popping off here. And, Ande Gadsden is going to be the talk of the week, right? The tight end. And I saw the story that his dad had him on the bench in fantasy. And in his dad's defense, as athletic as this dude was, like, there's a reason I hadn't really been pounding the table for him as a waiver pickup because, he stood out right away, as kind of a very good mover out there, right? But like that can mean a lot of things in the NFL. And, with as deep of a receiving cast as the Chargers have, with the three, starting receivers in Ladd and Keenan Allen and Quentin Johnston, and then we're seeing Trey Harris pop in a little bit, and then you've got more established veteran names in the tight end room. It's just a question of like, is Gadsden going to have the volume to really make plays? And or enough plays to be fantasy relevant? And I think the answer to that question is yes at this point. And yeah, I think he's an unbelievably talented player. If he happens to be available in your fantasy league, I think that's probably pretty doubtful at this point. But I would hop on him if you got any need at the position. So yeah, just looking at the profile to make sure I had the last name right. Gadsden. But yeah, Ricky out of Syracuse apparently, and yeah, he's just such a fluid mover at 6 foot, apparently 245 pounds, and that's what stood out to me. And even in that with that receiving cast, and it's a good group I think for the Chargers. You've got Ladd, who is so shifty, just really smart player, has some good burst up the field. Keenan Allen, who brings a little bit more length, plays with so much savvy and understanding of how to get open, and then Quentin Johnston, who's just continuing to get better and better, and just brings good long speed, obviously good length, good height and size. But Gadsden is just a little bit different. Quentin is not the most fluid mover side to side, everything like that, kind of the lateral agility. I think that Gadsden is probably a little smoother in some of that. And, yeah, he just sticks out as a really good mover. And, he's got a pretty unique skill set. So we'll see. I think it's going to be tough to pick exactly who's going to get the production in the Chargers offense here. But man, especially once Joe Alt gets back out there, if he's out there healthy and can shore up one side of this line with the way Herbert continues to spin it, because despite the mistakes that he made in this game, there's also just a number of throws like him stepping up, throwing lasers up the right sideline, stuff like that. He was spinning it. So I think there's a lot of positives for the Chargers amidst this tough stretch on the win-loss column. But yeah, I wouldn't, count them out yet. I'd say that there's, a long road ahead for the Chargers. Starts tonight though. And, I think them being at home Thursday Night Football, that's just, generally a positive, just if you look at that raw number. And then, the fact that Minnesota has to fly out to play them, I think that this would be, a game that's lined about right under the best of conditions. So, I would think that the Chargers have a pretty solid chance here. Obviously, Wentz could get his game back together, but, I don't think that's the most likely thing at this point after watching last week. That's a really hard thing to be projecting right now. So the Chargers, favored by 3.5. It's kind of trending towards 3 though with the pricing. So, I think that I'd play the Chargers in that game if it were me. Total of 44.5. I don't know. There's a whole lot there, but yeah, we'll see what happens. But yeah, no, definitely, hoping to see Herbert get back on track. I think that's fairly likely. Carson Wentz, we'll see. Obviously, can change the story in short order tonight, but we'll see. I wouldn't be putting my money on that one. So, moving forward to the Jets and the Bengals, and we'll see if we can't get through this one reasonably quickly. I don't know how much interest there is. You got Bengals favored by 6.5, and line a total of 44.5, 43.5 at one spot. So I don't know how much there is there. If anything, seems like the Bengals side and then the Jets, or the under are the plays here. I don't think the Jets defense has been a little bit better in recent weeks. No, they've been anything to really write home about. And then obviously the situational offense is just completely off the tracks at this point. Pretty disappointing the way this all ends. I think that it's fair to say that Justin Fields is playing at a much lower level than he played at, as the starter in Chicago 2 years ago. When DJ Moore had a career year, there were positive things that happened for the Bears on offense that year, and obviously I think they went in the right direction given where Caleb Williams' development continues to go. But at the same time, hard not to say that Justin Fields didn't play better in those circumstances. And, I think that it's tough to put everything on him. He hasn't helped anything, but at the same time, when, you're throwing to Josh Reynolds as your top target last week, I'm likely, that plan ain't going to work without an unbelievable run game, and they don't have an unbelievable run game. So we'll see what happens with the Jets. I don't think it's going to be anything good. I think that once you've got the head coach at the point where he's not going to tell you who the quarterback is between Justin Fields and Tyrod Taylor, I mean, it's you're really looking for advantages at that point. Obviously different play styles with Tyrod Taylor at this point in his career, but you need that much more preparation, or think it throws the opponent off that much. Like I don't know about all that, because this team sucks. So obviously if it's a good offense, then they've got different quarterbacks, then that's something to worry about. But still not going to have any viable receivers. I don't think Garrett Wilson's knee is going to be 100% overnight. And then, you flip this around for the Bengals, and it's been pretty simple. Joe Flacco is, able to get the ball up to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and they're making plays. Those guys are pretty good. And you throw in Chase Brown and an offensive line that, certainly, not world beaters out there, but they are, competent enough to do some work and give some teams some trouble. So, I think the Bengals likely to keep rolling here for sure. And could definitely be, a big game for either, Jamar Chase or T. Higgins. I wouldn't, I think Sauce Gardner's a really, really good player, but, if he's being asked to follow Jamar Chase around, I don't necessarily worry about Jamar Chase in that circumstance. I think that Jamar is, going to have the advantage over most corners in the league at this point. So, jumping ahead, we got the Buffalo Bills, who are favored by 7 or 7.5, visiting the Carolina Panthers with a total of 46. And I think we're going to see Andy Dalton start this week for the Panthers. I don't know that there's a whole heck of a lot of difference between him and Bryce Young. Bryce has obviously done some good things in recent weeks. Good to see, but it wasn't much of a drop off at all last year. Quite the opposite in that case. But I think that Andy Dalton can come out here and he can operate this deal with the run game being what it is, with both Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle available to the Panthers. They have to continue to feel out exactly how to use that. Obviously wasn't the most prolific game against the Jets last week, but they did, get the W and take that home, which is the important thing. And, I think that if they get the run game going against the Buffalo Bills defense, which, is all too likely, especially if, we see, sorry about that, especially if we see, and, if you've heard this talked about without it being explained, because I've heard this in several different spots, people are talking about how the Bills need to change their defensive structure, right? And I want to just briefly explain what they're talking about there. The Bills have been one of the teams in the NFL that has lived out of a pure nickel look in base situations and nickel situations for several years now. And kind of how this developed, I would say, is when you had a very 11 personnel heavy league, it became advantageous to be able to be in your nickel, almost all the time. But you also wanted to be able to be sound against the run. And I would say that, where it really pops up in my brain is Dennis Allen's defense down with the New Orleans Saints, and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson was playing the slot at the time. But, and I kind of got confused by that, but it was really who they played in their 4-2 front with their 4 down linemen and 2 linebackers that really dictated their ability to do this. And obviously having good linebackers is a big part of it, but the big thing is having big defensive ends who can control run lanes, right? So you think the Cam Jordans, the Tano Capassanons, that when they're drafting guys like Peyton Turner to fit this scheme, right? Peyton Turner doesn't work out, but would have been a really big presence on the end. So that's kind of what they're looking for. And just, if we're just talking very high level philosophy, we want to be able to, have the flexibility to have these cover players out there, whether that nickel is, kind of a hybrid slot corner like Gardner Johnson was at the time, or, a pure safety or a pure corner. We've got that flexibility, but we want to stay in this 4-2. The NFL has zigged away from that 11 personnel heavy world, where you saw, even if you were in 12, it was so often with a, pass catching tight end. We're seeing more and more teams shift to running a lot more stuff out of base personnel and running with like 2 legitimate tight ends on the field, stuff like that. It's just becoming a heavier league. And that was always the natural answer to all this too high stuff and people trying to play out of their nickel. And when people talk about the Bills staying with this approach of always being in the nickel, what they're talking about is they want to live in this 4-2 front with Teron Johnson as the nickelback. And Teron Johnson is a fantastic player, right? Like really impactful player out of the slot, but he's not a big player. I would call him a pure corner playing in the nickel slot. So, when Buffalo was operating in a different league and they had, Matt Milano, who was at the peak of his powers at the time, is in my book, an elite linebacker in the league. And then Tremaine Edmonds is an above average player and a bunch of good players on the defensive line. There was a lot you could do. And also, Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer being as good as they were at safety and being able to come down and help fit the run too, when you're playing out of this overall undersized group, was a huge part of that as well. So, we talk about it, and the Bills are still trying to operate out of this world where they live in this 4-2 look with the nickel. And they've got two competing problems, and those are that they don't have the same talent anymore at in a number of different spots. Most notably, I would say safety, even though the linebacker level is not as good either. And really I don't know that the D line is either. Yeah, obviously a lot of talent things, but the biggest thing, I mean, the safeties are terrible in the run game at this point, right? Like, I mean, Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop are, putting together, helping the league put together highlight reels is what it feels like. So they've got this talent problem, but then they also aren't changing the structure of the defense. And maybe you don't have the players to do this, but even there is a point back in the day where they were rolling out AJ Klein as the third linebacker and having more success with that. And just their inability and inflexibility to doing this when really the league has dictated that you kind of need to move away from this stuff. And not that you don't play that nickel package in certain situations anymore, but I think that just you can't just live out of that anymore. I don't think that anybody's going to have a ton of success just living out of that personnel package anymore, unless you have like a really physical, violent player and you're really rolling a safety up like a Derwin James to play that slot position. So yeah, if that's something you've been interested in, because just on some different pods and stuff, I've heard this reference and it wasn't really explained very well, like exactly what they're talking about. And really, to summarize that, it's the Bills trying to live out of a defensive structure that was built for more of a light offense, spread heavy, pass heavy league, as the league is going through a different cycle and the wheels turning over, and you're just seeing more and more teams go bigger and bigger. And the Bills just don't answer that with personnel and structure. They just kind of demand that their players figure out a way to fit against bigger players. And there's the argument that they're at a tactical disadvantage as a result. So anyways, might have gone a little long on that, but hopefully that's, decent explanation of what's going on there. But so all that to say that the Carolina Panthers, with their physical run game and the way they've been, using multiple tight ends and getting under center, doing a lot of different things, I think that they're set to have another good offensive game for the Panthers. And even with Dalton pulling the trigger, as I say, I think that he'll be able to have a solid game. I mean, Ted McMillan continues to ball out. They're getting more out of Leggett. They got a lot going in Carolina. I think ceiling is what it is with the quarterbacks, but they should be in solid shape. And on the flip side of the coin, despite Carolina's great success against the Jets offense, I do think Josh Allen and the Bills offense are likely to have a little bit more luck. We'll see how it all shakes out. It'll be fun to watch Derek Brown match up against the Buffalo offensive line, because Derek Brown has just been a beast in his return from the ACL this year. I mean, his tape against Chris Lindstrom in, I guess it would have been week 2 or maybe week 3 when Carolina played Atlanta is just fantastic in my opinion. And got JC Horn coming off the multi-interception game with just some nasty ones. I mean, you need to own this Carolina defense for your stars to be your stars, and Derek Brown and I think JC Horn are living up to that right now. So we'll see. It's a tough matchup against Buffalo though, because they just run the ball so well. Josh Allen might have had an off game, but I don't think he's about to have an off season. He's had off games before, see last year against Houston, and he's rebounded. So, I think that with the week off, Buffalo should be dangerous coming in. I do think the 7-5 is kind of a lot though. Probably plays some into Andy Dalton, but I think Carolina is good enough on offense that at home, covering the touchdown. I wouldn't play it past 6.5 for sure, but it wouldn't have surprised me if this was a 6.5. I guess would be my commentary on that one. I would also lean to the scoring side of this and maybe a little bit over that 46 that we're seeing. I think it dropped down a little bit from an opener of 47.5, maybe because of Bryce Young being out, maybe because of the Panthers just shutting down that juggernaut of a Jets offense. But we'll see. I think that we most likely scenario for that game is a shootout with no weather expected across the league this week. So we'll see how it shakes out. All right, next game up is the San Francisco 49ers and the Houston Texans. We've got a total of 41.5, and Houston favored by 1.5, which I don't know how. I don't think it should be a lot. San Francisco's going on the road. San Francisco is dealing with a lot of injuries. Houston is really, really good on defense. I don't know how you're favoring a team with San Francisco's record that tends to play winning football. I don't understand how they're an underdog against this Houston Texans offense. Had a little bit of a reprieve against some very bad defenses, but man, that was a putrid performance against the Seahawks. And if you only saw the final score of that game, it's probably worth noting how Houston was putting their points on the board in that one, because it didn't really have a lot to do with the offense. They had the sack fumble by Darnold in his own end zone that ends up being the first touchdown there, and and then they got the final touchdown on their, I think, very last drive. Yeah, unless there was like a 3-play kneel out or something. Last drive that I can remember for Stroud. And then I think Seattle did run it out from there. They got a touchdown on their last drive, and that was the points that got them over in that one, or the touchdowns. And yeah, I mean, it's just like really rough. Offensive lines just back to being bad. I thought Arion Tiersery had just a wreck of a first half where like it's back to like, he'd at least put up some forgettable film for a week or two. This week was not forgettable, where, he's just getting tossed aside. He's splayed out. He's just completely overbalanced. So, and I don't know. I don't have a lot of optimism that he's going to develop into a legitimate starting tackle in the NFL, just based on the lack of tempo and rhythm in kind of his movement skills as a pass protector and all. And I don't know, maybe a position switch, something like that. But it doesn't look like it's going to work for him at tackle. And then the rest of the group is just, it is what it is. They had, I guess we saw both. You saw Juice Scruggs slotting in there for Laken Tomlinson, them bouncing around. And then, got Ed Ingram over at the guard and Jake Andrew. It's just not working. So, they got worked by the Seahawks. And, even though the Niners aren't going to have Bosa and they don't have Fred Warner, I'd say that, for one thing, I think D Winters continues to step up. He's not at Fred Warner's level, but, I think he has good range, pretty good instincts. So I thought he played well in that game for the Niners. They got all sorts of guys popping up that, just finding ways to make plays. And obviously has these guys playing really hard. And, I think that if you're looking at this Houston offense, you're looking at all sorts of opportunities to make plays. And I think you're also looking at a CJ Stroud who has just, at this point, just kind of, it seems like he's just lost it. He's just all over the place with his ball placement, just isn't playing with rhythm, isn't playing with confidence. It's a bummer to see. I figure it's still in him somewhere, but yeah, he's not having a good time out there right now. And as we've seen across the league, different guys. We'll talk about one of them. Show differently in different spots, but yeah, it's not pretty right now for CJ Stroud in really any aspect. Nico Collins with the concussion, so we'll see if they have him or they don't. If they don't, I think it's a problem because they're so dysfunctional on offense, and at least the defense is great. Speaking of that, San Francisco, I haven't heard anything official on Mac Jones versus Brock Purdy. We'll see how that is a few days from now with Purdy's toe situation, but I think. Mac Jones just continues to play good ball for them, make solid decisions, and move the offense. I think that they've got a good plan for how they need to win each week. Christian McCaffrey, probably didn't give him enough love last week. Really nice game for CMC against Atlanta last week. Really was just the driving force for them is that they won that game. Just really steady. Just still does so much for you as both a pass catcher and a runner. But he's definitely got something left. So be fun to see how that matchup goes. I think that this one is play to the under. I mean, the Houston Texans are just seem like the under team to be playing right now. The result against the Seahawks aside, just with the way that scoring happened, and if you're playing this, I mean, I like the San Francisco side of it. Obviously, 1.5 is not a big deal, but man, if you want to play teaser legs and tease that 1.5 up against 7.5, I think that's a really nice one because I think that it should be the Niners who are favored by a point or two here. So not bad action. Jumping forward, the Giants and the Eagles. So Jackson Dart and it's so funny. I was going to start talking about Jackson Dart. Obviously, the Eagles have interesting stuff to talk about coming off that game against the Vikings. Which one? Yeah, let's go. Giants first. Yeah. So Jackson Dart, I guess that I was hoping, just given the number of points they scored, to maybe seeing more development out of him. I guess the end, I felt like it was more of the same. A lot of scrambling, making plays happen for sure. He's got a knack to him. But there were also like a lot of penalties in that game. Going both ways. Like I didn't think that Bo Nix played very well either. Just there's just work to be done. Both teams. I guess it was back-to-back drives if I'm not mistaken. They had touchdowns where they're targeting a different receiver and the ball gets tipped, somebody else catches it, and same time, like, I'm not trying to be down on Jackson Dart or anything. It's just, I didn't see like a different player out there week to week with what we saw. But, it just definitely raises the compete level for them. And it's a much more compelling product. Cam Scatterby is just such a fun guy to watch because, he's got the great power when he wants to go to that and get really physical. But I think he's also just got like really good tempo and spatial awareness and just a good feel for how to evade guys and how to time things up. And it's not just like he's running into everybody. Like he's doing that selectively and he's picking good spots to do it. And he's really, really physical when he does. But, I think he brings a lot as a back. So really, really enjoy watching Cam Scatterby. We'll see how it matches up against this Eagles defense that just is, felt like it was still a little bit in disarray despite all the mistakes that Carson Wentz was making. They're bringing in Brandon Graham. I think that speaks to the situation on the edge. They definitely miss Nolan Smith. So there are moments where you get reminded there's a lot of really good players on this defense. I think Jahad Campbell keeps coming along. He's really got such great burst to the ball was something I noticed last game, and the instincts just keep coming. So I think that that Campbell Bond duo is just going to keep getting better and better as the season goes. So we'll see. The Eagles are obviously racking up enough wins. Do they get their revenge against the Giants after that 34-17 drubbing? We'll see. Obviously, I think that you see what A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith in particular can do when you really unleash them for the Philadelphia Eagles. And, hopefully they figure out better ways to do that against the Giants than they did in this in the first matchup. Same time, despite the improved outcome for the Eagles, it's not as if I feel like they figured just everything out last week. Hopefully they're just more selective about the things that clearly work very well for them, though, which, getting those shots to Devonta Smith, especially on that post route, off action, it's just gotta be kind of, I think, what you aspire to be as the Eagles on offense. Like that should be like the payoff of the identity and really what you're looking to get. So we'll see. I'd stay away from this matchup given how crazy it was last time because, I still think there's a talent gap between these teams, but the Giants have been playing pretty darn well. 7.5, maybe would play that. So I just, think there's a good chance they keep it close, but I don't know. I don't see a whole lot to play there, but I think the good players will, be productive in this game, hopefully. And we'll see. Cleveland, New England. We got the Patriots favored by 7 and total of 40.5. I think it's another one where, under is probably attractive play. 7 is, kind of a sketchy number maybe to play against Cleveland just because the defense is dang good. But I take New England here. I think that Cleveland just, despite the point total last week, I think that was pretty deceptive. Quinshon Judkins with the phenomenal 46-yard touchdown run. And, I mean, Quinshon Judkins, man, he's every bit as good as either of the backs that were taken in the first round. He's a down feature back in every sense of the word, and you see the great explosiveness and the ability to hit the house from 50 yards out there, and then he gets the other 2 touchdowns in short yardage situations. Really see them trust in him over Gabriel quarterback. Quinshon Judkins with three snaps inside the 10, I guess, where he was taking the snap as the quarterback, scored touchdowns on 2 of those, so it seems to work. But it's very much the Quinshon Judkins show. Didn't think Gabriel showed a whole lot. Once again, he's accurate at times, but there's just so little there physically. I just don't see it. And, we'll see. This New England defense is going to present a tough challenge. I think, guys on the outside are playing well. This defensive line just continues to rack up good games. So we'll see what happens against this Cleveland offensive line. The interior is still intact and those guys are talented, but I think they've got a severe talent deficiency at offensive tackle. where, Harold Landry's having just a really strong year for the Patriots in his first year joining as a free agent. And then Caleb on Chasen really building on, he was starting to flash with the Raiders last year relative to, when he was in Jacksonville. Just very, very little to note on him. And, he just continues to develop. So, on the flip side of the ball, I mean, Drake May is just playing phenomenal. He's just helped he avoids the head hits and the head snapping against the turf, because that seems like it's all that's going to stop that guy. Offensive line isn't perfect. Obviously, you could get, better play at times from a couple of those guys, but, really, none of them are all pros, right? But at the same time, they're playing well enough for them to have a dang productive run game with Ramondre Stevenson and for Drake May to make a lot of passes. So I don't think that you got anybody out there on the offensive line who's preventing the thing from moving. Pretty hard to argue that when May's putting up the numbers he is. And, just a lot of weapons in this offense. It's going to be a really tough matchup against this Cleveland defense. I got to say, this Tyson Campbell, Greg Newsome trade is not making any sense. And it's just not looking good as it plays out, because, Newsome is up for a contract extension with Jacksonville, who has, a quarterback they've paid a huge amount of money. And Cleveland gets Tyson Campbell's deal, and he already signed it and got his bonuses and everything. So he's locked in at his price in a league where the salary cap is going through the roof. And I think we're really seeing here that Tyson Campbell is clearly the better player. Tyson Campbell had always been the one in Jacksonville. Now he's playing across from Denzel Ward, and as the two, he's just showing out, in my opinion. I think he's the better corner. I think he's a better player than Greg Newsome, who frankly got kind of picked on for the Jaguars, last week against it would have been in that slaughter against the Rams. So, I think that's not a good sign for the Jacksonville front office at all. We'll talk about them. I think they're off this week coming off that London game, but not a good sign for them. Great move for the Cleveland Browns picking up, Tyson Campbell, because I think that, him and Denzel Ward are looking really good as a tandem. And I think that they got better as a team on a preferable contract in this deal. So definitely a steal for them as they set up to inject their next quarterback into this infrastructure, which has obviously a lot of good pieces between the run game with Judkins and, obviously that interior offensive line on the older side. But I don't know, a few positive moves for Cleveland, or a few positive developments, at least amidst, obviously a losing season here. But I think it's going to be tough for them against the Patriots. Like the under in this game, though, because I just have very, very little confidence in that Browns offense. Obviously outside of Quinshon Judkins, but I don't think that's going to be enough against the Patriots defense that is, doing a lot of good things. Now it will be rubber meets the road, because Patriots have not had the great run defense numbers, but so much of the NFL is small sample size, and were you playing with this? Were you playing with that? What was the situation? So we'll see. But they need to, this is a week that they'll get tested, because obviously the focus for stopping the Cleveland offense is stopping Quinshon Judkins. If you're worried about anything about that, I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. So all right, and if you're looking to play those teaser legs that I mentioned earlier with San Francisco, you can take New England down to 1 to win the game, and I think that's a safer bet. So 7 can just be a weird number to cover if it's an under, so a low scoring game. So anyways, moving on to Chicago, Baltimore, and actually let me just pause brief. Actually, let's do the morning games and then I'll Chicago, Baltimore. So this game is between 6.5 is kind of the number that you see at most places. Some sixes, total of 49.5. I don't really get that. So Lamar Jackson, if I'm understanding things correctly, like he took third string reps at practice on Wednesday. He didn't practice at all on Monday on Baltimore's first practice. So I don't understand. Like, it doesn't sound like his hamstring is 100% by any means. I don't see why he wouldn't be practicing in full if his hamstring just felt great, right? Like, maybe they're using a rope-a-dope, strategy. But, I don't know. I think the Bears are going to take Lamar Jackson seriously, regardless of whether or not they think he's 100%. So just, if I'm making this number, I don't know. Like, Baltimore's defense has been really bad recently. And, I don't think that Lamar coming back is necessarily going to fix that. They weren't playing great with him. And, certainly I think Baltimore's offense has got a chance to play a lot better, but I don't know if they're going to be their full dynamic self if Lamar is back. And moreover, I'm concerned about the way that they were running the offense with Lamar, because I think what Baltimore runs into a lot, and this happened for most of the first part of last season before they really drilled down on what was working for them last year, is I think that they get over enamored with Lamar's development as a passer, which is very real. And they, want to drop back and be in empty and let him sling the ball around the yard. And it's not that he can't do that, but what I think really made this offense just overwhelming last year was what they brought in the run game with, the dual threats of Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. And when they are coming downhill at you behind Daniel Fillet at right guard, it's a lot to stop. And I felt like they stopped emphasizing that. And it's just, if that's not your bread and butter out of the gate and you kind of get off the game script and you get back to it at some point, or you don't get back to it at some point, I don't know. I think a lot of things can happen. And, I think that early on, this offense had a tendency to want to go to kind of that more pass heavy creative stuff. That I get it, it's those explosive plays and all the passing concepts are fun and all, but I don't think it's their best identity. So we'll see. If Lamar, his hamstring is hobbled, though, then that limits what you can do in the run game. And I do think that Derrick Henry obviously is a weapon in on his own, but it helps a lot to have one of the best run threats at quarterback in the league, because it creates a lot of hesitation in the defense. So we'll see. Flipping it around, I think Chicago's defensive front has been the defensive front especially has been improved of late, and I think that they're going to be able to battle with Baltimore's front, so they should be able to hold up. And then the offense just keeps coming along. I think that Caleb Williams, it just keeps getting better, and it's gradual every week, and it's not as if it's just straight linear progress, or there's not moments that you might not want to have back, or that you would like to have back. But I've just been really overall think that it's all looking good as the season moves along here. So we'll see how it all shakes out for the Bears this week. But I think that 6.5 is too much. I think that this could very well be a competitive game. I think that even if Lamar was healthy, that that 6.5 would be high, because I think that Chicago has been a competitive team, and the offense can be very explosive in bursts, and could definitely have a good day against this Baltimore defense that's allowed a lot of points. So the over might go along with that as well. But I think that the Chicago side of it is pretty interesting. Getting into the Miami Atlanta game. So this is Atlanta is favored by 7.5 points here. Total is 44.5. The 7.5 number might make it stick out as like another teaser we like to maybe pet play, but I've got a bad feeling about Atlanta right now. I would stay away from this. There's every possibility that they blow Miami out, right? Because Bijan Robinson is freaking awesome, and when he cuts it loose, who knows what happens. But I think that there's a lot of problems with the Falcons right now. Now the defense is playing great, and should be able to be a real problem for Miami, because they're going to have a huge advantage in the front. And then, they've got AJ Terrell to match Jalen Waddle. So, not a good setup for the Miami offense as I'm talking this through. Maybe playing the under in this game is something that is worth considering. But on the Atlanta side, I think that, Michael Penix's play at this point is just, getting to the point where you have to be kind of worried about this. And, his ball placement is just so erratic, and under ideal conditions, he throws it as well as anybody that you're going to see. But that's only going to happen so much in the NFL, and he only throws certain routes at a really high level, which is where like the arm strength is very clearly there, but like you kind of hesitate on using the word arm talent with him, because a lot of times when you're talking about that, you're talking about the guys who are so good at throwing from flexible arm angles and layering the ball and just finding different ways to get the ball out. And Penix, there's just not a lot of that. And I guess I don't know. At its best, it looks so good, and I think that in the right setup, and as he develops as a processor and everything like that, this could really work out. But in the short term, I'm just not sure like exactly how good this offense is going to be. And I think that the more that teams see this around the league, and kind of figure out the things that he's limited in, and you take away the things he's good at, just might be a little bit longer development curve. So, I think that, very, very different play style than Bo Nix, but I think that, there's some arguments that, that in the way that they've got such specific ways that they need to win, a lot of the time, yeah, just not very well-rounded quarterbacks at this stage in the game, and I think that that's a problem. So, yeah, right. As I say, the under in this game. I mean, Atlanta's defense really good. Miami is, not so great on defense, but they do have some players along that defensive line, and yeah, as I say, with Penix playing the way he is, like it's just getting hard to see, Atlanta blowing, on anybody. So maybe this is the week they prove me wrong, and they obviously have had some big performances this season. But yeah, it's just we'll see. Not what I was expecting after some of those early performances that look so great. So, all right, about to flip to the afternoon games. But before I do, just want to mention if you're watching video version of this, you can see in the background I got my newest book, a novel called The Bubble Society. It's available for purchase over on Amazon now. If you like to support the Essential NFL project and all my work, checking out the Bubble Society and seeing if you like it is a great way to do that. So yeah, just want to take a little segue to mention that I just got the new cover done, and yeah, I'm making the official launch date tomorrow. Obviously that's always subjective kind of thing, but yeah, I got the official cover ready and get author's copies delivered tomorrow, so really have it ready to push and market. And yeah, really excited about how the book turned out, and yeah, really cool being able to get a cover that I'm as excited about put together for it. So yeah, a big shout out to my brother, owner of Colorado Cool, and his wife, my sister-in-law, for putting that design together. Yeah, we'll pull forward, but yeah, really cool deal here. For listening to the pod, this is great. But yeah, you can see on the video just all the danger, safety, for your safety signs. Yeah, Bubble Society is a dystopian novel with a lot of satire to it. So yeah, and then it's this orange that just sets it off. So I really dig that. So yeah, as I said, if you have any interest in reading, in addition to football, check that out. Really appreciate it. Hopping on to these afternoon games. So we got the Bucks and the Saints, and I think that you got two teams moving in different directions. And I would say that on the Bucks side of it, I didn't feel like. I mean, that game against the Lions was just such a disjointed game with some of the fumbles and everything, and it just wasn't Baker's night in terms of some of the deep balls and everything. He just wasn't really on the screws. But I think he'll probably bounce back from that. It's tough to play. 17 perfect games in the NFL. That's for dang sure. And yeah, I think that Baker's given us plenty of reason to be optimistic. I think also Emeka Ibuka, looked pretty darn good last week. So he's obviously working through this hamstring, but the fact that he got through the game fine and is obviously a positive. So that we'll see how that works as they move forward. Obviously, losing Mike Evans is such a disappointment, and didn't get really much out of him this season, with just kind of some quieter games to start out, and then this game have some targets that take him out of bounds, just don't work out, and then it looked like he has that big play on the post route and ends up breaking his collarbone and losing the ball. And definitely a tough blow for this Buccaneers team that has just had so many injuries on offense. But Baker keeps playing well, and the Saints defense, they've got some decent players, but last week was a week where I was really feeling like Demario Davis, it's not the same as it used to be. That's for sure. And I think that there's just some limited players on this defense, even if there are a couple guys coming along. So yeah, I think that the Bucks find a way in this one. 4 on the road is kind of a weird number to have to get, but I think that the Bucks, it's a professional unit led by veterans like Baker Mayfield on the offensive side of the ball. Tristan Wirfs, guys like Vita Vea and Antoine Winfield, Levante David on the defensive side of the ball, and I can't imagine them, given how important this game is for the NFC South, for everything, not getting it together after losing that game on Monday night and coming out and taking care of business against the Saints team that talking about Spencer Rattler last week, and he's coming off a poor game, and we'll see. As I said, probably a career backup but should be a good backup. But yeah, we'll see if he has a better week this week. Bucks coming off a kind of I don't know, up and down game on defense. I guess you'd say there were some forgettable moments. Definitely Jahmyr Gibbs got after them pretty good, but I think that there continues to be flashes of good from this team too. So we'll see. Definitely like the Saints in that one. Don't have a whole lot of opinion on that total there. Got Dallas at Denver with the Broncos as 3.5 point favorites at this point, and the total at 50.5. And I gotta say, I think 3.5 is a lot right now. Now, the Broncos made the comeback last week, but man, Bo Nix, we're at a couple of weeks now of just it's kind of confusing what's going on in the background here, frankly, with him and Sean Payton and the play selection and the lack of evolution and just things feel pretty stale here. And it doesn't feel like things are going great on the back end. And the total is what it is for I think a pretty good reason. Dallas defense is just not good, and then as good as the Denver defense is, that Dallas offense is humming now. And you get George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb out there with the way Dak Prescott is slinging it, and it's that is a lot to stop. And Pat Surtain, we'll see how they deploy him. My guess would be that you probably match him up to George Pickens, and Pickens is a little bit easier to isolate and have one guy cover. And CeeDee Lamb, more the slot movement player. But and that's a heck of a matchup. Surtain's obviously a very long corner, but if you don't have him covering CeeDee, then maybe CeeDee goes to work. So and Pickens is capable, I think, at this point of having a great game against anyone in the NFL because he's just playing at really, really high level at this point. And if you didn't know anything about the backstory and everything, he'd just be saying this guy is, one of the premier receivers in the NFL. His ball tracking is just phenomenal. Some of the, sideline catches over the shoulder, dragging his feet. I mean, Pickens is playing at a really, really high level. Offensive line is playing well. Javonte Williams coming off a good game. And we'll see. Some revenge game aspect with Javonte Williams coming back to Denver there, with the Broncos wanting to move on from him. And I think there's a reasonable chance it's high scoring. But if I was playing any side of it though, given the Denver defense being good and the Denver offense being prone to sputtering here, obviously a good opponent to rebound against if you're going to rebound against anybody, but so have to do that. I'd play the Cowboys side of this if you can get the full 3.5. I mean, I think this should probably be on the other side of the 3. It's maybe the records don't reflect it, maybe the opponents don't reflect it, but I think that Dallas and Denver are both kind of in the same tier as teams that have flaws on one side of the ball and are likely to make the playoffs, but it might have trouble competing for the ultimate prize unless they find some more balance. So we'll see. But I think that getting in the 3.5 with the hook there is a nice setup there. So a couple of one of our less enticing games of the week. So we got Tennessee and the Indianapolis Colts. So I'll speed through here. I want to finish up in an hour on this one. So 47 minutes now. So the Titans, I mean, obviously it's just kind of a lost season at this point. And just more ugliness ensuing in last week's game. I think that, obviously Cam Ward losing the ball out the back of his hand is an ultimate low light kind of moment against the Patriots there. But at the same time, if you cut out those really negative plays, like if you're watching Cam Ward play down to down, I think there's still a lot to build on, a lot of positives to pull out as you're looking at how do I improve this week, right? And there's a lot of quarterbacks that are currently successful in the NFL who their film looked a lot rougher as rookies if you were looking down to down, and there were not real positives to pull from it. And Cam Ward continues to have big time throws. He had some nice throws to Chamari Dike. Or Chamari Dyke, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, this past weekend, and him in the mix. I like Moore's, one of the other top targeted receivers. He's playing with these rookies, and it's results might not be great this year. Well, they're clearly not going to be great this year. Let's put it that way. But hopefully you just see Cam Ward continue to make positive plays each week. And hey, only advice for Titans fans out there is I would just focus on the positives more than the negatives with Cam Ward right now because he's in a learning stage. The team is not going to make the playoffs this year. Doesn't really matter, if you're winning or losing games. Like, is the quarterback giving you moments where it looks like he's doing promising things? Is he attacking down the field? Is he making, throws that require him to, move from one receiver to the next? Is he making some plays under pressure? And I think that, there's negative moments too, but, there's still positives. So, I think that the line of 14 against a team like the Colts makes a lot of sense. Probably play the over if anything there, because, I think that the Colts, still have a lot of issues in the back end of that defense, despite some of the success they had against the Chargers. And man, did DeForest Buckner have a game last week that definitely stuck out. He looked awesome for the Colts against the Chargers. And against the Titans offensive line, I think he could do so again. But I think 14 points and everything like that is all lined about right. So getting into one of the premier spot matchups, get the Green Bay Packers going into Pittsburgh to face off with quarterback Aaron Rodgers. So, pretty neat storyline. And I think, Aaron Rodgers coming off his best game of the season, the vertical route that he hit up the sidelines to DK Metcalf early in that one definitely stood out, I think. And then, man, the play he made to, evade pressure and hit Pat Fryermuth for that long touchdown before he gets tackled by Broderick Jones on the sideline, who, in addition to just not wanting it, it's like, the play before the twist, the twist that Rodgers had to evade, that was, multiple guys involved, but the play before that, Broderick Jones had got him beat pretty darn quick. So, multiple things building up there, but that was pretty funny. But I thought Rodgers, seeing him make those movements, and obviously is not the athlete he once was, but being able to do those little things to extend the plays and then hit big time action like that to Freiermuth is, really an encouraging sign for this Pittsburgh team. Same time, they have to play way, way better on defense. And I think it's fair to be worried that they've got way too many guys on the wrong side of the age curve. I think that, Jalen Ramsey would be a name at the top of the list there in terms of, the talent level and the expectation versus the reality. Darius Slay was obviously, moved on from for a reason. And I think you could throw both Darius Slay and Cam Hayward into a bucket where those guys played, I think, pretty darn well last year in a lot of respects. Cam Hayward especially. I mean, he had, all pro type season that, I felt like hadn't seen that Cam Hayward in a couple of years, but, I don't think we're seeing that Cam Hayward this year. And there's just not enough with the depth around him to supplement. And then, I think that, another thing that just, stuck out of late is just, sometimes you see the good of Patrick Queen with the speed and everything, and then sometimes you just see like the guy is just going the wrong direction and everything like that. I think that that dictates so much of how things go for this Steelers defense right now. And you just worry about that against an offense like the Packers that's schemed up so well and gets guys going in different directions and all that jazz. I think that, last note on the Pittsburgh offense, of that matchup, I'll be interested to see if the Packers continue to just play Keyshawn Nixon on the defensive left side of the field and rotate guys on that defensive right side of the field. Got kind of a weird situation where Nate Hobbs, to me, he was never a good outside corner. Where he was dynamic early in his time in the NFL was when he was playing in the slot. But the Packers want to play so much of that big nickel look. They've only got so many slot looks to offer, and but anyways, what I'm interested in for the outside is whether, you just have Keyshawn Nixon try to follow DK Metcalf or kind of stick with the defensive structure that you've used. Because obviously Steelers are a team where there's one specific guy you probably want to focus on. And Keyshawn Nixon, he hasn't been perfect, but he's done a lot of different good things. Kind of had the peanut Tillman punch to get a ball out last week that, nearly fumble. So we'll see. He keeps battling, keeps coming along. So, flip side of it, Packers offense, I mean, you just feel like there's just so much juice here, between Josh Jacobs' run game and, some of the things Matthew Golden's doing and what Dobbs does and what Tucker Kraft brings. And then just, aren't putting points together consistently. And, offensive line's been, fine, but, not dominant. I don't know. I don't think that's the problem. I think they just kind of, I don't know, need to get it together in terms of last week they're, throwing into the end zone on 4th and 2 and just missing the pass when it looked like Love probably could have scrambled up the middle to get that converted there. And just little stuff like that, I think, is a lot of it. They have times where they're clicking and scoring the points they need to score. And, you can be disappointed. Well, obviously they lost the game to the Browns, so that doesn't fall under this heading. But, the Bengals and the Cardinals are still competitive NFL teams. They've got a lot of good players on those teams. The Cardinals with Brissett at quarterback had taken the Colts, giving the Colts a game a week before. So, it's easy to just want to blow out everybody. And, obviously that would be more positive, but at the same time, you don't want to overlook getting wins in the NFL. So, I think Green Bay is definitely the more talented team. Reason that they're favored by 3 on the road, but I'd stay out of that one because I think that could clearly go either way, especially with Green Bay being the favorite. I think that reflects the talent, but got to go do it. And I could see Rodgers having a pretty good night against his former team if they've got a good plan against them. But we'll see. I think Arthur. Oh, by the way, I think Michael Parsons made the comment that, Arizona let him rush against them. And, that's such a big part of it for a pass rusher, right? I think that, Arthur Smith's really going to limit those opportunities. You probably see a lot of Darnell Washington playing to Michael Parsons' side of the field if he's lining up on an end. We'll see how it all works out and what Green Bay's answers might be to that. That's the chess match, right? But that'll be a really interesting part of the game is seeing, kind of how the Steelers seek to mitigate the opportunities that Michael Parsons has to just, be cutting it loose and getting after their guy. All right, last game to talk about here, and unfortunately, it's not nearly the matchup you would have hoped it was before the season. With Washington playing against the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday Night Football here. Jaden Daniels officially ruled out here, which I thought it was kind of a foregone thing because it looked like the hamstring on the non-knee injury leg, which, brace on one knee, hamstring injury on the other leg does not seem like a good situation. Just obviously a really disappointing deal for Washington. The defense is bad, and Dorrance Armstrong's down for the year now. It feels like so much of their pass rush in this most recent week, especially, is coming when they're putting Von Miller and Jacob Martin on maybe one side of the field, letting those guys play games together. Those two kind of bring in something, but you're talking about Von Miller at a very advanced stage of his career, and Jacob Martin, who's always been kind of just this complimentary rusher. I think Deron Payne has had some good moments, but it's just not good enough, right? And the secondary is just not there, and you get miscommunications in addition to guys like Marshawn Lattimore is just not a good player anymore, and I don't know. It's Washington's in such an interesting situation because they have so much cap room in the years to come here. But they've got a lot of veterans who have been injured, and then they don't have a lot of core talent on the roster. And we're entering this phase of the NFL where it's just going to be hard to find talent because with the cap going up the way it is, teams are going to be able to retain the free agents that they want to keep or think are promising players. And Washington's going to be able to outbid people on the guys that get out there, but how many of those guys are really going to get out there that you're not going to wind up overpaying for because they're not going to be the only ones with money, even if they have this huge surplus. So, I think that hopefully the offensive line finally gets, healthy with Brandon Coleman getting back out there. But, I make that comment because we did see Sam Cosmi return to the field this past week, but it seems like it's just ships passing in the night for the Commanders this year. And, they just can't get everything clicking together. And obviously there's a different universe where, as Sam Cosmi's ramping up, Jaden Daniels has been healthy, Terry McLaurin's healthy, Deebo Samuel is healthy. They've really, gotten Bill Krusky Merritt to the best of what he's shown he can be, against, I guess it was a Chargers game that he really lit it up. But, that just has not been the story for the Washington Commanders this year. And it doesn't seem like anything's going to get rectified here. Other side, Kansas City is just humming. And, I don't know. I guess there's another pro football focused debate taking place on the grading and all that jazz. I'm not sure how you're not grading Patrick Mahomes very high right now. Like he's, just doing a lot of really good things. And there were moments in that game against the Raiders where some of those drives could have stalled out, but they didn't. The Chiefs generally made the plays. And I think Mahomes is playing at a really high level. They've just got a lot going, a lot of weapons in this offense, a lot of juice on this offense. And, this has all been without Josh Simmons at left tackle. Jalen Moore continues to be solid filling in. So it feels like, they played all the right notes this offseason with it seemed like it might have been overkill bringing in Jalen Moore in addition to using the first round pick on Josh Simmons. It's turned out to be the total opposite for them and has allowed them to keep humming along here. So, Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes getting his MVP vibes going again. I see them, living up to the 12.5 point favorite, if not outliving that. It was 10.5 when there was apparently some uncertainty about Mariota playing, which if I'd have realized that was the reason it was at 10.5, Jesus. But yeah, no, bumped to 12.5 then. I thought it might just stay at 10.5. I figured that was just, everybody had ruled Mariota in as the starter. I was wrong there. But anyways, I wouldn't play the total here either. I think Kansas City's defense is playing well. And I think that, now that they've got this deal figured out and they've got Jalen or not Jalen, Noel Williams. It's Nohl Williams versus Jalen Noel. But anyway, sorry, rookie names rattling around my brain. But yeah, I think now that they've got this situation fixed with that outside corner and the nickel, and they can start weaponizing Trent McDuffie again. Yeah, I don't know if they're going to be as elite as they were when L'Jarius Sneed was at the top of his game. Which he certainly is not for Tennessee. But I think that they can still be a damn salty unit. They've got a lot of versatility, unlike, what I was talking about with Buffalo. Kansas City and Spagnuolo were kind of the ones that got ahead of it in terms of being able to get back into a 4-3 front and bring in a linebacker like a Leo Chenal to play that heavy presence on the end and give you the versatility, and then also be able to play these different big nickels. The nickel with Trent McDuffie in the slot, big nickel with when they bring Shamari Connor down, or whatever safety configuration they want to use. That's the type of versatility you kind of need to have to counter all the different looks you're getting in the NFL right now. And so just probably a good way to wrap today's show up in terms of pointing to an example that would be the other side of the coin there, where regardless of what the talent is, at least we can get body types matched up here, right? And that's really what personnel comes down to. It's getting body types matched up and deciding whether you'd rather, be, smaller and faster or bigger and more powerful. Those are usually the trade-offs we're talking about. Like, obviously, if we're doing the quadrant and you can pick, big and powerful and fast, that would be the ideal. And obviously, small and slow would be where you don't want to be finding your players. But, the NFL is not a league of perfect players. So much of it is trade-offs. And right now, the league has, it looked like it was going more and more towards kind of what college football was feeding it, with these spread offenses and lighter personnels and smaller deployments. But then you get to the men's league, and the coaches are able to be more selective about what they want to run because there's only 32 teams to put together. And, if you want to be able to emphasize some big guys and tight ends and stuff like that, you're going to be able to do it. And that's really the wheel turning that we've seen in the NFL in these past couple of years. And it'll obviously turn over again at some point. But right now we are very much in a period where I feel like you have to have some size and physicality to your offense. I think it's really hard to play with just a pure sprint offense right now, so to speak. And, you have to be able to counter that on defense, and it'll turn over. And, I'm sure that at some point, all these defenses will catch up and, kind of have the personnel to, in most cases, match this power game that has become more and more prevalent across the league. And then it'll change back again, and offenses will, use speed to take advantage of that, teams going towards more power. And that'll continue to be the story of football as long as, they allow folks to play it. So anyways, always a blast talking ball. A little over an hour, but hey, not too bad for a pretty crowded slate this week. So hopefully it's a great week of football. Starting with this Thursday night game. As always, thanks for checking out the show, everyone. And as I mentioned, if you get a chance to check out the Bubble Society, sincerely appreciate it. Have a great one, everyone.